Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
So good morning, Dr. Jennifer Pollitt. Thank you for coming on the show today. I grew up like in a pretty conservative Irish Catholic family, and sex was taboo. In many ways, it was. You know what I mean? And then there was this girl, unfortunately, in high school, who got pregnant and hid it for literally 8.5, 9 months, and people just thought she was getting fat. She hid it from her parents because they were a super Catholic family, and she ended up when she had the baby, it's public record, she stabbed it to death, the fetus, or not the fetus anymore, now the baby. So I always feel like there's this tension in society between being too conservative and too tight, which can lead to the kind of things I described there, and then maybe like too liberal and anything goes thing, and I think that recently, over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, where homosexuality has become, like, in many ways it's almost vogue, it's almost like a popularity thing, kids in high school. I think it's good because I think a lot of people were tortured when they were younger by the stigma of it and everything. And I was doing a seminar with the lawyer group that we're in, and you were in the seminar. I'm like, I got to get this professor on because she's super interesting. So just thank you for coming on. Give us your kind of your background, what you're about, what you do for a living, and how you got there, and then we can talk about. And I wanted to play. There's a song. What's the name?
Talk about sex.
Yeah, what's the name of that song? Let's Talk About Sex by. There's a song.
Salt and Pepper, Let's Talk About Sex.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I mean, my theme song.
Exactly. So I wanted to play that theme song, but then Oscar said we're not allowed to.
We don't have
Copyright.
Yeah.
But everyone can have that song in their mind, and that's the intro to the show. But go ahead.
Well, first, thank you all for having me. This is super fun. Never could I have ever imagined that getting a Ph.D. in human sexuality would end me up in any of the places that I am now, that aren't part of like the sexologic world or don't have sexuality at the forefront, except that everything has sexuality at the forefront. So I was really excited to get the email. I was excited to meet you in person at NJAJ, New Jersey Association of Justice, and thrilled to be here. I also applied to Villanova when I was going to college, and it came down to a few schools, but where I've ended up now is not where I started or where I thought I was going to start. Basically, every decision that I have made towards a goal in my career, if I've made a plan for it, it like hasn't necessarily worked out. But everything I could never have planned for and has been like kind of the happiest accident has created this like unbelievable, satisfying, like exciting, I feel like overwhelmed by gratitude for all the cool things I get to do like this. So stop me at any point. But I grew up in North Jersey in Bergen County, and to my awesome parents, I'm an only child. And dad was a courier, mostly like in New York and up and down the Northeast. Mom was an office manager, secretary. And so I was the first person in my family to go to college. I'm the only person in my family to have a PhD. And so that was like a huge family accomplishment. But I initially, when I was a young kid, I always thought that I was going to be an MD doctor. And so medical school was like where I wanted to be. I loved science. I loved helping people. My mother's father, so my maternal grandfather, he was diagnosed with cancer when I was 12. And it was just like one of the most devastating things. I was also raised Catholic, so I figured if you just pray enough, like it'll go away. And then it didn't go away. And because like my mom and her siblings were working, tons of different jobs or working a ton. And my grandmother, my grandparents on my mom's side are both Hungarian immigrants, displaced people from World War II, like so many others. And so English was not her first language, and medical stuff didn't come the easiest. So I ended up becoming like not responsible, but I wanted to be there, like helping with my grandfather's care. So I was like medicine, doctoring. This is super duper cool. And I did everything in my life to do that. I went to the University of Sciences in Philadelphia, and I love Philadelphia, majored in the physical sciences, and then was like, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. And I walked across the graduation stage and I was so mad. I was so angry because all of my friends knew what they were doing. Some of them were going to medical school. And here I was feeling more lost than I'd ever been before. So I wandered around for a couple of years and I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school and study something. I also am an optician, so I make eyeglasses. And I was working for an optical shop. And my boss, but also a really good friend, had just recently gotten divorced. And he went on a date and he called me and was like, Jen, you're not going to believe this. I went on a date with a sex doctor. And I was like, that's not a real thing. I'm a serious scientist. Like, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
Like, you went on a date with a porn star. Like, like, good for you. And he was like, no, legit. Like, she's a sex doctor. Do you want to bet? And I said, yeah, bet. And he's like, you can't Google it. So I was like, all right. So we bet that this was a real thing, and I lost the bet. And because I lost the bet, I had to go to Widener University's open house for their graduate programs in human sexuality. And that is how I ended up getting a Ph.D. in human sexuality. So I went to the open house. I met the then director, Dr. Betsy Crane, and I shook her hand, and it was like lightning struck. I felt magnetized to the earth. I felt like my feet were firmly planted. I had no idea why. It just felt like an ultimate pull, and I applied, and then 6 months later, I was in my first classes. And the rest is kind of history. So this was not something that, at the time, I understood as where my life would take me. And now looking backwards, right, you can kind of see those breadcrumbs. I'm sure maybe you have the same experiences. And so looking back, now I see that the breadcrumbs were always maybe going to lead me there. And I was just really happy that I was attuned enough and open enough to take the leap and take the risk.
So you're you're a professor at Temple University. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
And you also teach in the law school as well. You do classes?
Yeah. So just a quick what I do. So I've been at Temple for over a decade now. I love Temple Maid.
Go
so,
Big Five.
Absolutely.
The Owls, Temple Owls.
Temple Owls. And so I'm the assistant director and an assistant professor in their gender, sexuality, and women's studies program. And the courses I teach are Introduction to Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, a course on sexuality education, so different from a human sexuality course, looking at the field and discipline of sex ed. I teach a course on men and masculinities, on sexuality and disability, and then a course called Social Perspectives of Digital Pornography, the other sex ed. And then last but not least, I was invited by the former dean of Temple Law, Dean Rachel Rebichet, to build my very own elective course about sexuality in the law. And so that launched this past fall. It was a huge success. The feedback from the students was really heartwarming and just mind-blowing. Again, never, ever could I have ever imagined that getting a PhD in human sexuality would take me to teaching at a law school, and that it would go so well, and that students got so much out of it. And it was really supported by the administration. So it was one of the most thrilling and exciting experiences. Bringing my skills and talent in my field, it's a whole brand new audience.
So why is sexuality a field? I mean, isn't it something that we shouldn't talk about? Something we do at the doors closed to procreate, and that's about it? Why is this something that gets studied, and how does that help to advance humanity?
Yeah, so, I might have asked that same question. Again, when I entered grad school, I was as green as the grass, right? I was taking comparative animal physiology and organic chemistry and psychopharmacology courses. What I knew about sexuality was I found a Playboy in my dad's closet when I was 5, right? Yeah. And then hormones kicked in at puberty, and I was trying to navigate it and figure it all out too. And it wasn't until I was in grad school that I was whoa, we're starting at sexuality, which is one of the most intimate, joyful, exciting, life-giving, nourishing, but also shameful, insecure, fear-inducing, fraught parts of our lives. And it was Widener, and being at Widener that showed me that there is not a single part of our sexual lives and our sexuality that doesn't touch all the other parts of our lives.
Yeah.
Not only personally, of course, but professionally, academically, the relationship that we have to ourselves, to others, to our families, to our colleagues, to strangers on the street. And so with each course, and even still, each year, I'm still harvesting fruit from that exact same tree.
Are there any other animals or mammals where shame is associated with it? Like, have there been studies about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I know that, we were talking a little bit about some of the, Christopher Ryan's, like, Sex at Dawn. Like, to my best knowledge, animals, we don't know, like, we can't ask the animals how they're feeling, right? So whether it's shame or...
But you can tell by the fact that they don't do it in the bushes, they do it out in the open.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, right, the peacocking is what we usually think. And so, by and large,
do humans peacock?
Yeah. Oh,
they
yeah.
do, right?
Humans definitely peacock.
The pluming type thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's this song. I'm thinking about Mark. There's a song. What's that song about the Jersey, Seaside Tony? There's a song called Seaside Tony. Okay, and it's about. In New Jersey, in Seaside, in the summer, you get the guys that come down and they're all steroided out and the thing and like trying to hook up with girls. And I feel like that's peacocking.
That is absolutely peacocking, right? Yeah. Like going, I now, I'm no longer like on the prowl.
Yeah.
I haven't been in a long time, but I was like out on a Saturday night, like kind of late for me. I usually tuck myself in at like 9 o'clock. I'm super boring. But I was out and I was like, oh my gosh, like, look at everyone's advertising. Yeah. Like, the young people are out and about and, like looking good. And then remembering too, just like, oh gosh, it's been so long since I've advertised.
We used to do it as a joke where basically we would not even act like we were hiding it. Like, I think, Planet Earth had like just come out, like the David Attenborough thing. There's a bird of paradise that just goes around. So we literally would be out at a bar in like our early 20s, just going like that, like around, like peacocking.
Little mating dance, right? Like, how do you get people's
attention? It didn't work, but.
So there is, I guess it looks like humans are the only ones with the shame as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
What is that from? Is that what separates us from the animals?
We were talking about, and that's a really good question. We were talking about like from the earliest mention of human beings, like even going to the Bible. One of the first experiences, like they eat the apple, they get knowledge. It's shame that they're naked, and like why that's such a big part of, humanity and the human experience.
In the same, like humans are social animals, right? And so we learn from each other. So it's not that like we're born and we come out and we're ashamed, right? We learn all of these things. We learn what to be ashamed of. Sometimes we learn why we're ashamed of that thing. And so, it's through also like our social and emotional learning. So like, what are we learning about our bodies? Like, think of a really simple example. So I've done sex ed for kindergartners all the way through 100-year-olds. And when people hear kindergarten sex ed, there's nothing that freaks people out more. And I get that because not a lot of folks like really understand like what sex ed means in its practicality. But here's an example. So you're teaching your kid all about body parts: eyes, ears, nose, elbows, oohs, ahas, down there's private parts.
Yeah.
And so even something as simple as that, and like I get why we do that, right? And there's like no criticism.
Why do we do that? I don't like. Why are the Barbie dolls androgynous? Is that what you would say it?
Yeah, absolutely. They're like non-sexed, and so we do that because we're like worried. Right? Like, can I say this word? Like, will I be perceived as, teaching my child something bad? Or like, this is something that is private, not necessarily secret, but private.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but by doing that, right, we're already sending the message, like, you can call this a nose, but you can't actually name your genitals like penis or vulva or vagina. And so what's like one of the consequences of that? It's a 100% true story. I was in grad school, and one of my classmates, she was already a nurse. So she was out in the working world. Because of the nature of Widener's program, especially at that time, it is the only accredited program to get a Ph.D. in human sexuality in North America. So we had people flying in from California, Chicago, like everywhere. So it was also like a lot of non-traditional, students. So she was a nurse, and she had a 5-year-old son. And he was in school, and he was on the playground, and he was, running around, having a blast, and he fell. And I think he fell on like one of the swirly things or something like that. And one of the bars like caught him right between the legs.
Yeah. And
he hurt his penis. And so he went to the teacher and said, like, I hurt my penis. And instead of sending that kid to the nurse, she sent him to the principal's office because he said the word penis.
Oh, man.
And so when then my classmate got, the call, like, your kid is being suspended.
What?
Your 5-year-old son is being threatened with disciplinary action because he used the word penis.
Yeah.
She went in and she said, are you kidding me? One, my son was telling you he was hurt and injured, right? And he was 5 years old at the time. Like, So it doesn't necessarily have like all the ways to articulate what damage might have been done.
Yeah.
So not only did you not help him, but then you punished him. And so, that's just like one example of where even from like our earliest days, shame, like it's almost like by omission, right? The
Yeah.
things that we're not saying have as much of an impact as the things that we are saying. And so like, what would it mean? And we know that children who have accurate names for all of their body parts, including
Yeah.
their genitals, are more likely to tell you when something's wrong, when someone's like touching them inappropriately or when they've hurt themselves. They're more likely to grow up and have a healthier genital self-image. So when they start
If they're
engaging,
open about it when they're young.
yeah,
Okay, got it.
and it's not like talking about like, oh, like
Yeah, because back in the day, a lot of the child molestation was totally hidden
Yeah.
and it was unspoken, and it was so bad that you wouldn't even out the molester, right? Isn't
Right.
that like?
Yeah,
you know,
because
you'd
of
have
all
to
of that
be-
shame and also like the victim blaming.
Yeah.
Like I must have done something wrong, even if you're a 5, 10, 12-year-old kid, right? Like I've been taught that this is like a super private area. Now someone touched me there, and so I somehow am responsible.
So you think it's healthy to talk to kindergartners about it in a way,
Again, in an age-appropriate,
in an appropriate way,
developmentally appropriate way.
but
And
not make it the big taboo that we don't talk about. That's probably unhealthy for children.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the like tight spots that parents can sometimes get in is if their kid asks them a question, right? And as adults, we're like, all right, like I'm going to tell you like the whole answer, but to listen to like what the kid is actually asking and don't over answer the question.
Have you ever had any involvement in like child sexual abuse type cases where you have to go in and interview
So
them or
no,
figure it out?
I haven't. Certainly, I have had a number of folks in my world, whether it's strangers on the street that meet me for the first time, or students in any of the spaces that I teach, whether it's a class at Temple or a conference, et cetera. Of course, they've disclosed to me, and I'm able to give
the
them
appropriate-
resources.
yeah.
But no, I don't work directly with victims or survivors of sexual abuse or assault in that way, like through our legal system.
So why do some cultures women walk around with their breasts hanging out, and others is that like is that so you think the shame is sort of a learned thing? So did cavemen? Did they have this kind of shame? You know what I'm saying?
So what I will say is, like everyone else, I'm really captivated and fascinated by like, well, what did our ancestors do? What was it like then? It's so hard to know, right? Because we're doing our best. The anthropologists and the sociologists and the historians are trying to interpret.
It's like, oh, we found the vibrator and the condom in front of the campfire with the food, so therefore they must have been right. But we didn't have those devices back then.
Totally.
So.
And it depends like who's telling those stories,
Yeah.
right? So
It's like, oh, we found the sex toys were all like in the back of the hut.
Yeah.
The thing that we-
in
With the partition
the
up,
nightstand, the
yeah.
caveman nightstand. And so, right, so we can never really ultimately know. In the same way, to think about like even 100 years from now, how are the historians going to tell our stories, despite the fact that there is this huge digital archive, right? And we have so many more data points, but it's all up for interpretation. And so you're relying on whoever the curator is of the experience or who the storyteller is. But and shame, like any other emotion, is like value neutral. It's not good or bad. So the goal is not to like create a society that doesn't experience shame ever. There's like there are plenty of things that we should absolutely feel shame about, right? Because what does shame actually do? It should motivate us. I mean, it does a lot of things, but one of the good things it can do is motivate us to recognize like I did something bad, or I did something wrong, or I messed up, and I really have to like take accountability and I have to apologize because I don't want to have a rupture in this relationship. This relationship is really meaningful. And whether, the harm was intentional or unintentional, like I want to make sure that I can stay in relationship and community, like with this person or with these people, right? So shame can motivate us to be like better people. But it's a matter of like, is this something that I should really feel ashamed by or about? Or is this something that I've been told to feel ashamed about? And then really trying to evaluate like which one of those it is. And so there's so much stuff, especially related to our sexuality, that we are told we need to apologize for all the time.
So like we have this like liberal conservatives can be overly, whereas liberals, I guess, can tend to get to like maybe a licentious thing. But like when we have the 60s, the summer of love and free sex. And I mean, there's no such thing as free sex, right? There's always...
Everything is going to be a risk calculation.
Yeah.
It's going to be a risk-benefit analysis.
I mean, it's not healthy to go out and have sex with several people, like at Woodstock in the water, and like that's not healthy, right? I mean, it's not physically healthy. It's probably not emotionally healthy.
So I think that it depends, on an individual determining like what may or may not be healthy with them, and then also what risk they're willing to take and not willing to take, and what consequences or benefits, right, are they going to like weigh. What we do know,
like when you look at porn, like a porn star, okay, I've never watched porn, just for the record, but like, isn't there tremendous baggage with a porn star? I mean, tell me. Like,
say more. What do you mean when you say tremendous baggage with a porn star?
Talking about psychologically, like the person.
Yeah, of course. Like emotionally, like so. Like if you teach a class on porn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you have like a porn movie, right, and it looks however it looks, right, but they don't show you the emotional stuff after that. And is that really a thing? Is there a tremendous emotional baggage, or is it like, hey, no problem with this, we're good, and here we go on with our lives?
So, so I'll back up. I'll answer that question.
Like, is that just my Catholic guilt? That's my question. Like.
So what I'll say is the one thing that you're probably gonna hate me for in this entire podcast episode is that there's no not that there's never a right or wrong, but it's very little is black and white. So because I teach the porn class, because I also I'm on the board of an organization called Woodhull Freedom Foundation that advocates through law, policy, and education for sexual freedom as a human right. And so part of that work is also sex worker rights. So I'll say that are there some people that are going to end up doing porn for a variety of reasons that absolutely are harmed by it, or are entering because they are particularly vulnerable, feel like they have no other opportunities, maybe are experiencing low self-worth, low self-esteem, et cetera? Yes. And so we want to make sure that we are creating like economic avenues, right, so that they don't have to do that, and they have actual agency to make a choice.
Right.
But are there also folks that work in porn and do sex work that to them it's like just a job,
Right.
and so it doesn't come with that emotional baggage, or maybe a past trauma history, et cetera. And then for other folks, right, they're going to be like, I do porn because it's an expression of my own art and my embodiment and sexuality. So there's like a wide variety and spectrum, and it also depends on the type of porn. Are we talking about OnlyFans, where you have where the person ultimately has control over the content they're producing, the distribution of it, et cetera? Or are we talking for someone who's, maybe younger, less experienced, and is working for a production company that isn't like the most savory, right? And so is being more exploitative. And so when a lot of people think about working in the porn industry, and this is something that comes up in my porn class a lot, we talk about ethical porn, but the ethical part is not what you see on camera. The ethical part is all the labor practices in the background. So is this person, right, who's doing this job being paid fairly? Are their boundaries being respected? If they sign up for a particular scene and then the director says, all right, well, now I want you to do this other sexual behavior, do you have the right and freedom, or do you have the freedom to say yes or no? Based on whether or not that comes with the paycheck, you are worried that they'll never work with you again, et cetera. So a lot of like the ethical sides of porn come from actually like the back of the house labor practices, not necessarily what you're seeing like on screen.
Is that regulated?
I was going to ask, is there a union, anything like that?
So
is it regulated though?
I mean,
like OSHA. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
There are testing standards.
Applies to every employment situation in the United States.
Yeah, so there's nothing like that for porn.
But if someone is in a porn and they're not using protection and they get a disease and you can link it to that, you should, under OSHA could theoretically come in and fine them for not having a safe workplace.
So there are state laws. This is also rapidly changing because there used to be brick and mortar like porn production companies that were centralized, mainly in like California. And now, right, like because of like all the digital technology,
got a camera and
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. And also, you have to recognize too that it's gone from, we've taken, the arc of like porn and labor has been so dramatic, especially in the last even 20 or 30 years because of, the internet. And so, you have like the big production companies, but then you also have like a huge amateur, you have a huge amateur porn being created. And so like, there's, if you're working in the porn industry and the sex industry, you're like required to pay taxes, but you don't really have any legal protections.
Really, as a
As a sex worker, yeah. And when I say sex worker, like I should say that includes folks who are, everything from working in the porn industry, like in front of the camera, folks working at like strip clubs. There are like obviously different nuances here, but by and large, and so you have very little protection. One of the largest issues is payment processing. Because, credit card companies can just kick you off of their processing servers if they don't like what you're doing. And so this is a problem, with OnlyFans, when OnlyFans is like, all right, the credit card companies are getting unhappy. We want to make sure that we take the sex off of OnlyFans. And then OnlyFans was like, oh, that's actually not a good business model because that's what we were making a lot of our revenue for. Right. And so, so there's a lot of regulation in terms of like what sex workers can and can't do for their livelihoods, but there's not enough regulation that actually legitimately protects sex workers from things like physical, injury, financial injury, et cetera. It's complicated.
Is it legal? Is porn legal in states and all the states or whatever?
Yeah. So again, like I don't know each particular state's law,
but just generally.
Yeah,
I hear there's a warning sometimes at the beginning that has a code that says statutorily, over 18, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Well, there are age verification laws now, which is different from like, is it legal to create and produce porn? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it, but what can happen, if you're on a set again and you've never negotiated a contract or you're in the middle of a scene, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to stop production because now you've got like an entire staff of people, like the camera guy, the lighting guy, the guy who's, delivering the catering.
But like New Jersey just codified the ABC test for determining if someone is an employee or an independent contractor.
Yeah.
It makes it very clear. The rideshare companies were very much against it.
Yeah.
Because if you got in a crash by, say, an Uber, can you sue Uber or not?
Right.
Because Uber is obviously the deep pocket.
Yep.
And they were fighting super hard to say, no, they're independent contractors, therefore you can't sue me.
Yeah.
But now it seems pretty clearly that, an Uber driver would be considered an employee of Uber, in my humble opinion.
Yep.
So if you apply that to porn, let's say there's porn in New Jersey, that the actor or the actress is an employee, and then once you're an employee, there's all kinds of rights.
And benefits.
There's wage an hour, there's overtime, there's taxes have to be paid, there's workers' compensation.
Of course.
If you get hurt or get a disease during that.
Yeah.
What's the deal? Or do people just be like, again, the shame thing, it's in the closet, so we're not going to, I'm not going to come up and file a workers' comp claim because I got hurt making a porn film.
Exactly.
Or are we not getting to a stage where there's legislation and things coming out because of the same reasons where the legislators are like, it's too taboo, I don't really want
But it seems it would already be covered
potato.
because it's an employment situation, so it's
Agreed.
already covered. But like, have you heard of like porn actresses enforcing their rights as an employee or anything like that?
So I would say that like by and large, out of the majority, it's not happening and it's not really true for a variety of reasons, right? Again, especially because a lot of like when I say porn production, that might be like a 2-person crew, right? And so it's like a super duper small business.
But still, if you're a guy with a truck and you pick up your nephew to go move some weights or something, that's an employment situation. On New Jersey, you have to have workers' compensation insurance on that employee, and if you don't, it's a crime. You have to pay, like you can't pay them cash because you have to take out taxes and all that. It's a big cash situation, I suppose, in the porn industry.
And again, it depends, like, because the porn industry is so large and vast.
Yeah.
So, the difference between, like, again, managing your own content, being on OnlyFans, like running your own show versus like working for a production house or working for a cam site, right, where they're taking their cut. And so, like, if you work for a cam site, you're basically an independent contractor. You're using their platform to boost your brand. But by and large, and you again, pay them their cut. But there aren't a lot of employment protections for folks who like work in the porn industry. Right. It's very state by state, but no, it's certainly not like the industry norm or standard.
So you have an entire class on this subject, basically.
Yep.
And
well, I have an entire class.
Well, not this subject.
Right.
Yeah. Basically on essentially digital pornography, right? And because it is the elephant in the room kind of, it's so pervasive in our society. And I think you say your class, it doesn't come down one way or the other that it's good, that it's bad. But what does the class entail? What does it kind of, enable your students, which are at a very vulnerable age, to kind of like what tools give them and all that?
Yeah. So I was really.
And also, how does one get an A in the porn class?
That's a great question.
Dare I ask? There's not like any take-home projects.
No, there are no take-home
projects. That's on
projects.
page 47.
Check the syllabus for the assignment list. But my inspiration for this class was twofold. Number one, I also teach a men and masculinities class. And in that class, I was really fortunate to have a 65-year-old dad. I love that about Temple. You just have experiences in classrooms that I think at some other universities, you don't have like that kind of diversity necessarily. So he was 65 years old, and there was also a college freshman, brand new, shiny, 18 years old. And I have only taught the porn class, now this is for the 4th time, but in each of the courses I've ever taught, I've always spent a week talking about porn.
Hold on, I have a question.
Yep.
Is that class hard to get into?
Yes.
I got to imagine that
Yes.
fills up right away.
So typically it is over-enrolled with a wait list. And I would say that, some of my other classes, because they're coming out of gender, sex, and women's studies, there's, kind of a sampling bias. I would say with my porn class, that's the course that I have the least sampling bias in. So I have students that are in finance, in, chemistry, in marketing, in advertising, in classics, in philosophy. Like, I just have a ton of diversity in that class. But in my men and masculinities course, I was doing a week on pornography and masculinity. And so I realized also relatively quickly that what I had to build in, certainly to my porn course, was I had to remind now the digital natives that were sitting in my classroom. So the young people who don't know the world before the internet, I had to take them through what it was like before there was internet porn, right? So what kind was it? How did you get it? How did you pay for it? How did you sneak it home? Where'd you hide it? How'd you watch it? All these things. So
we used to, we would bike back from our Catholic grammar school, and we would stop at us and our 4 or 5 friends would stop at the pharmacy in Spring Lake, New Jersey, and they had Hustler, Playboy, OUI. Playboy was boring.
Yeah.
And then at one point they stopped even showing anything in Playboy.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was going through kind of the analog versus digital, and my student, 65-year-old dad, raised his hand and said, well, back in my day, it's hard to sometimes get your hands on. So you just had to close your eyes and fantasize. And I had, so I really appreciated that he shared that. And then I had the 18-year-old freshman man raise his hand, and he said, what are you talking about? And he said that because in that moment I realized that he had never masturbated without using pornography. And so the ability to fantasize and imagine was a kind of a brand new or foreign concept. And so I had wanted to build a porn class for a while, but that was just another data point that I was collecting. And then also, on average in the United States, whether, a young person goes looking for it or not, they find porn between the ages of 8 and 12. Roughly, the average age is 10. And so I was really curious. Not, of course I'm curious about porn and labor practices and porn and public health and all this other stuff. But what I was really interested in is, all right, so if we know that a majority of the population has seen porn or watches porn or has partnered with someone who's watched porn.
What's the percent that masturbates or does of men and women? There's studies on that, right?
So there are, and again, right, the data that we collect about people's intimate and sexual lives is always going to be a little incomplete.
Yeah.
Not even questionable, I would say just incomplete because of the nature of how vulnerable, because of the taboo and the shame.
Yeah.
But we know that by and large that, my own personal anecdotal evidence is that men and women masturbate at approximately the same amount. It's just that
I'm saying what percentage? Like if someone says I've never masturbated, pretty much they're lying.
I think that there's maybe a few exceptions, but I would say a majority of people at some point in their life have masturbated or regularly or, masturbate. And so, again, what are the messages that we receive about Sarah McClelland she's a researcher scholar, who has a great framework called intimate justice that asks the question, who is entitled to an experience and who is entitled to enjoy it? So, like, what is the taboo or shame about male masturbation versus female masturbation? And so, as we've started, right, to dismantle or unpack some of that shame, we now know that more women are like willing to say, yeah, absolutely, I masturbate, because it's not as loaded. So, but a majority of people, beginning in puberty and throughout how many ever long years they have on the planet, self-pleasure, as not only just for like sexual pleasure, but as a way to soothe, relax your nervous system, boost some, immune function. Like there are multi-purposes for why humans have adapted to self-pleasure. And so, yeah.
Sorry, you were telling about the porn class, and we went off on a masturbation.
So what I'll
road,
say is, I'm really curious. I was really curious. Well, if we know that like, most people at some point in their lives will look at porn or see porn, especially when they're young, and now we live like in the digital age. I don't know, like, what are you learning when you get there? What are you learning about your body? What are you learning about other people's bodies? What are you learning about pleasure? What are you learning about gender or race or class or behavior? Or what are you learning about power? What are you learning about in terms of techniques or how-tos? And so my porn class really looks at porn as an informal sex educator. And so as like someone who does formal sex ed, I'm really curious, like what else do people learn, not only from porn, but all the types of media like Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, like about our bodies, the bodies of others, our relationships, intimacy, again, sexual pleasure or anxiety, sexual function, dysfunction, like, and everything in between. And the students who register for my porn class, they, some of them register because they're like, I love porn. It's really great. And for me, it's been an overwhelmingly positive way to explore my sexuality and see myself rendered in a way that like I've never really seen, my body isn't represented or et cetera. And for other students, it's like, I registered for this class because I hate porn. And I think that it's like absolutely, deleterious to like entire society. And then I have like, again, it comes out on the bell curve. I have the middle who's like, I'm here because I don't really know. Like, I think it's like kind of cool and kind of not cool. And I just want to learn more. And so by the end, I would say that everyone recognizes that they came and registered to take a porn class. But what they end up leaving with is like a fuller picture of humanity. And, our desires, our wants, our needs, like the things that make us tick or the things that we crave or yearn for, or the things that we're frightened of or that we transgress or are afraid to transgress. And so it ends up being a lot more about the human condition, especially now in the age of AI, and less about like porn specifically.
Do you find, we become so tribal, with the overload of information and like you've said, the fire hose of information that we get. So I guess it's just easier for people to just be in a camp because that way they can, I don't need to hear your details. Your label or, you're this label. But do you find with porn that liberals are against it? Like I could see liberals being in favor of porn because it's like free your body, do whatever you want. But then liberals could be like, oh, no, you're objectifying women, you're degrading women. Yeah. Like, so how does that wash out in terms of the acceptance of porn and liberal versus conservative, blue states versus red states, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so fascinating.
Because it's funny, like they used to say, I interned for Bob Dole in the Senate back in high school for a semester. And it was funny. You'd have issues where like Senator Jesse Helms and Ted Kennedy
all of a sudden
would be on the same side of a weird issue.
So I would say that, also like if you think evolutionarily, humans were designed to survive, right? Like that was the primary goal.
Yeah.
So it's not unreasonable that we would try to like put things in neat, tidy boxes. Right? We want to know, like, if I eat this berry, is it going to nourish me or kill me?
Yeah.
Right? Is this animal going to, like, attack me or, like, be my friend and be loyal? So it's a really easy knee-jerk reaction to think, like, liberals think this about porn and conservatives think this about porn. What I can say is that I am so fortunate to be the collector of, at this point, thousands of stories across the political spectrum. And there is no way that you can put anything in one box. So I would say there's also a great, it was a dissertation by Dr. Justin Citron called The Sexologic Worldview, where this is the Ted Kennedy, Jesse Helms part, where as open-minded as someone becomes, right, it works to a point and then they become closed-minded again.
Yeah.
And so I would say that like we are, again, more similar than different. And so there are plenty of liberals that hating porn is a bipartisan issue, I would say, that by and large,
Yeah.
or not understanding porn. A lot of the mainstream headlines too are like a lot of fear mongering,
Yeah.
and there are legitimate reasons that we can talk about the harmful effects. But I would say that the notion, and it's also fascinating because on the conservative side, you also have libertarians who are like, you can't regulate or tell me about anything in that way. And, on the liberal side, I mean, we are just reliving the sex wars, the feminist sex wars from the 1980s. Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon. This is all heterosexual sex, and porn is inherently objectifying and damaging and harmful to women.
Yeah.
And the other side saying like, no, absolutely not. This is, a way for women to express their sexual and erotic agency. And so who are you to be so paternalistic telling them what's so good for them?
Yeah.
So, I think what I started to say before.
And it's not your job to make the decision
No.
and say it. It's to lay it out and enable a conversation.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
First of all, what's the point of telling someone what they should think or believe? It's so
like
boring.
you're the PhD, so you must have the answer of who's right or wrong.
No,
That's
I'm
not the
here to
idea.
tell you like this whole menu of options and help you try to contextualize and make sense of things.
Yeah.
But then like I've done a really bad job if you just walk away like being able to mimic exactly what I've just said.
Yeah.
I haven't engendered any critical thinking or perspective taking or empathy building or new knowledge.
Yeah.
So, I'm here to lay out whether it's law and policy, whether it's like medicine, whether it's education, whether it's the history of all of this stuff and how it comes together. So like, here's what we know. And then I need you, for yourself to apply that to your own life, to your own work, to your own relationships.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I don't know if maybe either of you saw or read, but when I launched the porn studies class, that's the class that got all the press. And so what a wild ride that was. I was not expecting that.
Were you getting a lot of pushback? Were there people coming out of the woodwork like, this is horrible?
So I will say that Temple was wholly supportive. I got no pushback from the university at any level of administration.
See, it's so important. Like, we have the attacks on the universities and the free thinking.
Yeah.
I think I read something, I think it was in Wall Street Journal or something, that in Nazi Germany, the only people that would go anywhere close to challenging what was going on were professors in universities, and they would never come out and say it. It was an implied thing. And I think once you start to tamp down on Temple, they're so liberal and they're, like you need that liberal thinking. And I don't mean liberal in the sense of Democrat, Republican, red or
liberal
blue.
in the true sense of the word.
Of letting your mind wander and think. Like when UFOs and that stuff, and maybe we'll get to that. But like there's this professor, his name was John Mack, and he used to write about alien abductions. He was a Harvard psychologist who would write about...
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, his name is Professor John Mack. I think he passed away now, but he's got several books out there. And he would write about... So if someone would go to a therapist and say, I've been abducted by aliens, right? And they're otherwise totally sane, they had no one to go to. Yeah. So John Mack was doing this, and he was studying people, and he was interviewing these people, and he was finding these things. And he got brought up on charges at Harvard that they wanted to take away his tenureship or whatever they do when they want to discipline a professor. And lo and behold, now the government is having hearings on aliens and, UFOs and stuff. And like, it's important. I think it's important in universities and stuff to not tamp down on free thinking. It's very important. And once you start shutting people up and anyway,
it's a really slippery slope.
So when
Academic
you had your
censorship.
porn class, as Mark was asking, did you get a lot of that?
No, so I would say,
Pushback or
this
whatever?
is why I do love Temple. Obviously I'm biased. I've been there for over a decade, but a lot of the work I do is relatively, it's innovative, but some people think it's controversial. And Temple has not told me to stand down at all. They've been supportive. They have been supportive of my academic freedom.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. Like once we start, it's like censorship is such a slippery slope,
Yes.
right? And I deeply appreciate the work that the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression does, FIRE. And So I would say that from the director, from my director in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, all the way up through, the powers that be, it was like, okay, great. Like, let's start this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that once you put policies in place that stop conversations, like that's the really hard part. Now, what I will say is I was like, oh, cool. And I still think this way. And I hope it never changes. But I'm also like blissfully naive in some ways. I just think that whatever I do, people are going to be excited and want to talk about it. And like, I'm not so naive to think that there's not going to be pushback. But I was surprised that after the university, did a press release on the course, it got picked up by a ton of news. And much like my actual course itself, I got a lot of really beautiful and amazing emails from folks like literally around the world saying, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for someone to like have a conversation like this. And then I also got, some really nasty stuff and like, hate mail in my inbox and, and threats to my own safety and security. At one point I had to have security posted on my floor because people, but that is indicative to me that
You struck a chord.
I struck a chord
You're heading in
and
the right direction.
and that people, right, are deeply invested in the parts of our lives that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
And so I wrote an op-ed or an essay for Huffington Post about my experience of teaching this course and how, there's what people think it's about, right? And especially in the age of manufactured outrage,
Oh, God,
where our
yeah.
algorithms are just feeding us stuff to be outraged about.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in any of that. So I was really deliberate in all the press that was done about my porn course that I had control over, of course. I'm not in this for it being sensational or being like titillating or, if it is, like, fine. But I'm really interested in like the nuances of like, I want to help people start a conversation about what will make their lives ultimately better.
Yeah.
Whether it's their sex lives or their relationship with their kids or their own parents or their friends. Friendship right now is, slightly in crisis.
So can there be too much sex and too much porn where it becomes, we were just talking to my esteemed nephew colleague before we came on today, and he was saying, isn't it like, wait, is it Gen Z? You got Gen Z?
Well, the news refers to me now as a geriatric millennial.
Millennial.
So
And then
I was going to
excited
say,
about
I
And then
might
the
be in
next
that
one's-
camp
it's
now.
alpha. So Gen Z are the folks that are like in college.
Who are the ones whose faces are always in their phones? And
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Gen Alpha will be as well, but Gen Alpha is the younger.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Gen Alpha's totally screwed. But okay, so he was saying that don't Gen Z, they don't have as much sex anymore because there's AI and it's on the computer and it's like, is that a thing?
So the research that we currently have, what's borne out is that by and large, Gen Z compared to Gen X, millennials, Gen X, boomers, et cetera, are having less sex, drinking less alcohol, and smoking less cigarettes, although nicotine is really interesting, doing less drugs. But the caveats in that are maybe they're smoking less cigarettes, but they're also using Zyn, which is the nicotine that you just put in your cheek. And they're also not using as many drugs, but they're also eating or smoking a lot more THC. But so some of the things that go into those statistics. So in that notion of like, can there be too much sex?
Yeah.
Like I think I started to say this earlier. Humans are really consistent, if nothing else. So the pendulum will swing one way and then it will swing back the other. So you can see, right? And there's so many directions I could go with this, but. So the Atlantic published an article in 2018 called The Great Sex Recession. And it was like, oh my God, society is crumbling. The young people aren't sleeping together anymore. What's going on? So I think that it's multifactorial. So one, I think that there's part of this that like maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe they're actually having less bad sex, right? So maybe they actually are talking more about consent and boundaries. And so they're opting out of sex that they didn't really want to have to begin with. That's like, on the positive or optimistic side. The other part of this is also, maybe they are watching porn more, or they're not even watching porn more. They're just scrolling on Instagram and TikTok more, right? The other part of this, though, that's being less talked about is that we know that more and more young people are either starting or are on psychotropic medications at younger ages, so antidepressants and anxiolytics, so anti-anxiety drugs. So imagine that you are...
Well, that's to combat the cell phones.
I think that
I mean-
I think it's slightly more complicated. I don't think it's just like I don't think that the rise in depression and anxiety is just about cell phones.
But if you
I
track
think it's contextualized in the larger sphere of things.
But if you track the emergence of cell phones and social media with depression, anxiety,
Oh, yeah, and if you look
doesn't
at,
it
like-
track together up?
So if you look at is it Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's part of it, but I don't think it tells the whole story. And the reason I say that is not to pick on the anxious generation. As a rule of thumb, as a professor, I don't trust any researcher that says this is the single reason for this.
Got it.
So do I think that that's like a big part of it? Absolutely. Do I think it's the only part of it? Not quite. But one of the other things is, so if you're coming of age and you have burgeoning sexuality, but you've also been on antidepressants or an anti-anxiety drug, which you maybe need, very much so, right? A lot of my students in my sexuality and disability course, they're like, oh my God, Dr. J, like I didn't even realize, I've never even really known like myself as a sexual being without my anti-anxiety or antidepressant. And my doctor never talked to me about this. So the fact that I have low libido, or the fact that it takes me, a while, if ever, to achieve orgasm, this is for men and women. Or like, I'm just thinking like, am I a weirdo because I'm not horny, or like I'm really horny? Is it my Wellbutrin? Like Wellbutrin's like the happy horny drug, some call it. And so like the great sex recession.
How do you get that?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, of all of the category of psychotropic drugs, Wellbutrin's
sounds like a
the
winner.
tagline is the happy horny drug.
It's getting hot.
I thought you were going to ask him to put it in the show notes.
No.
And so I think the sex recession is a combination of increased access to digital technologies,
Yeah.
whether it's porn or social media, et cetera. I think that it's a lack of opportunity sometimes too. So we've also like diminished, like kind of, not in a cliched way, like third spaces. So like, where do kids hang out? And if you're hanging out mostly online,
Yeah.
and you're not hanging in person, you're not like smelling them.
What's the
you're
expression?
not
You said third spaces?
third spaces. So places that you can go and congregate where you don't have to spend a ton of money. So like the mall, right? Like I grew up.
The cemetery behind
Exactly,
your neighborhood,
exactly.
the
The
basketball
parking
court,
lot,
the
the
thin
basketball
strip
court.
of woods off the bike path.
I always preferred Under the Boardwalk. Mark.
Under the boardwalk.
Yeah, there's several songs about that.
Of course, of
Under the-
course. So I think that there's a bunch of reasons that young people are
One
having
time I was
less
under the
sex.
boardwalk, and literally a rat ran across my legs.
Sexy, very
I
sexy.
thought you were going to
Yeah.
tell like a
Set in the
sexual
mood.
story or
Set in the
something.
mood.
Well, you have to fill in the sexual part, but it was
Oh,
a rat
got it.
ran across my legs. It's crazy.
That is, oh my goodness. Oh my
Anyway.
goodness. No, but so I think that there's a bunch of different reasons that young people are having less sex. And we know that this younger generation, that Gen Z is also, like research bears out that, or the research that we have bears out that they are just more risk averse than older generations. But that also is complicated to me because although they're taking less risks in the way that we like would define risks, so like drugs, sex, and alcohol, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I would say that they're taking, like, what is more risky than putting your whole life on social media, right? So I don't necessarily know that like this generation is wholly less risk averse than any other generation. I think that the way that we define and operationalize risk is different. And so, yeah, I think just lack of opportunity. Again, a conversation about like how medicated Gen Z is compared to other generations. And then this notion of like, is there too much sex, right? So with this pendulum swing, I haven't like, one day I'll write a paper on this. It's the thing that fascinates me the most. I am really captivated by transgression, right? And so
What is that?
Yeah, so transgression is like our desire to like transgress, either break norms or to not transgress and to follow norms.
Yeah.
Right? So with sex, right, so much of sex is about transgression. So whatever the social cultural norm is in your world, are you a person that's going to adhere to that? Or are you a person that wants to like be outside of that? And so with each iteration of pendulum swing, right, that's why the pendulum swings, because if we're so sexually repressed, right, the transgressive thing to do is to be super sexually liberated. And then as soon as we're super sexually liberated and free, then like the transgressive thing to do is like, have a more traditional conservative
Become a
relationship.
monk. Yeah.
Become a monk. And so I think that like, and history bears this out. We can see the pendulum swing from, the Victorian era to the Roaring 20s to the conservatism of like the, you know, post World War II or World War II America,
the 50s,
and the 50s. And then you've got the sexual revolution and women's liberation, right? And then you have like the swing back to purity culture.
Yeah.
And so
Reagan in the 80s.
And so we're constantly negotiating and navigating like I think our relationship to transgression. So like maybe it's just not as transgressive to have sex as much anymore, you know?
So I got on this conversation about homosexuality at one point, and I try to think, like I try to unplug and think. And I was thinking to myself, like, is there an evolutionary advantage to homosexuality? And I thought this myself without looking it up or anything. And I thought, so like if you're in a tribe,
Yep.
and I thought about this, I think I was like working hard one day and had to get back home with the kids. And so like if you're a tribe and you have to go out and hunt, right? So, you know, a bunch of men go out and hunt. The ones that have to go back to a wife and kids have to go back and hunt. Or they have to leave the hunt and go back and go back to the hut and take care. You know, because if you go hunt, it's not like you're going out in 20 minutes. You can go out for days. But if there's homosexuals in the group where they don't have a child or a significant other to go back to, and they could satisfy the sexual need out in the hunt, well, then they can hunt more and bring back more. So I was thinking about that. And are there any studies or anything about whether there's an evolutionary advantage to homosexuality? Because if you look at things very purely, it's all about natural selection, survival of the species. So are there any studies about that or anything like that?
So a few things. So, you know, one of the critiques of like evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology is that it's prescriptive and not predictive, right? So when we go back in time, we're using, even if we try to be as like objective and think as critically as possible, we can't help ourselves.
Because there is homosexuality in the animal world, right?
Absolutely.
And
yeah, we see sexual diversity across across species.
And does that cause harmony in the tribe or things like that?
Yeah,
I've
so
seen
like,
with monkeys
the
or something.
bonobos, of course, are the classic example.
Yeah.
And so they use sex and sexuality in order for social cohesion, and there's a lot of same-sex sex happening with bonobos. So it's like really difficult with humans because we're really curious, and so no matter how hard we try, we're still applying like our to our best abilities. We're applying like our current understanding and social norms and values about sexuality to so long ago. So right, the word homosexuality is only about 150 years old. You know, there's a great book called The Invention of Homosexuality, and so prior to that, like whose genitals were interacting with whose didn't necessarily dictate sexual orientation. It was just kind of part of existence. And so I don't necessarily know that there's like an evolutionary advantage to any particular sexuality over another, but I do think that there's an evolutionary advantage to sexual diversity because of the different roles that people play in their particular tribe, in their particular community.
Well, there's an advantage to heterosexual because you can't procreate otherwise in the natural world.
Right. So I would say that, so yes, but I think that the evolutionary advantage to diversity in sexuality also, I mean, there's not, again, there's of course like literature on this and research, but it's the storytelling of how we're trying to make sense of it. And so, yeah, is it really advantageous for either heterosexual folks who don't have children or folks who are like part of the LGBT community to not have children so that they can be amazing aunties and uncles and help support, right?
Right. There's studies about that. Yes.
Without a doubt. And so like I don't have my own children,
And they can
but I have the time and capacity, right? Because I'm not caring for my own children to be like the number one aunt in so many people's lives.
And now that you say it, that can also fill in the gaps where if a parent dies, which happened frequently back in the day.
Exactly. So the notion that like it takes a village,
Yeah.
right? And again, this notion of like whose genitals were interacting with whose genitals as dictating like sexual orientation, it is remarkably and vastly different in terms of the associations than we talk about now. Now, like it's called the OBI model, orientation, behavior, and identity. So orientation is who you are romantically or sexually attracted to. Behavior is who you're doing it with, and identity is the word that you're using to describe yourself. So we know that there are a lot of instances for someone, let's say, who identifies as female, who is exclusively attracted to women, but then also maybe behaviorally has sex with both men and women. but identifies as straight. Right. So we'd like to think that all those line up, but humans are messy.
Right.
And so orientation, behavior, and identity are three distinct like pieces of our lives that sometimes they all align. We're attracted, one person of one sex is attracted to someone of the other sex. They sexually engage with that person and identify as heterosexual. But it doesn't always map out that way. Research does bear that out.
So you can't even say it's genetic or it's not genetic. Your
Right.
sexual orientation. It's an amalgamate. It's a mix. I guess, is what
there
you're
was a
saying.
researcher, Simon LeVay, who we've come a long way in terms of LGBTQIA, civil rights, visibility, acceptance, tolerance, even though there's a backlash.
What's the difference between queer and lesbian? Like Q. What does the Q refer to?
Great question. And for those who are interested, there's an incredible book that I use as a desk reference called The Queen's English by Temple alum Chloe Davis.
Queer when I was growing up was always a derogatory
It was a
thing.
pejorative.
Yeah, pejorative.
So queer has been reclaimed, and basically it can be used as a catch-all. So for someone who doesn't want to narrowly define themselves because maybe there's like a little wiggle room.
Why do we have to use pronouns? Like, why do we do that? Is that
wait, let her finish what queer is.
I
Let her
know,
answer
but I'm
that.
just-
Then do pronouns.
I know.
Because I want to know. I wanted to know.
Queer
Sorry,
can be
sorry.
like
I gotta write notes, and so I don't forget these things.
Queer can be a reclamation, used as a reclamation. It can also be used like a catch-all. So I don't want to narrowly define myself,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to use queer. And then lesbian is a more specific identity for women who exclusively are romantically and sexually attracted to women. There was a great study by scholar Lisa Diamond out of the University of Utah. This is a long time ago now, like 2008, which doesn't seem like it should be that long ago, but it is. And so she was one of the first scholars to do a longitudinal study on women's sexual fluidity. And so she followed a large sample of women for over 10 years. Who used a bunch of different words to identify themselves and then tracked, is that still true? Has it changed behaviorally, the words that you're using, et cetera? And what she found was there is an amount of sexual fluidity, certainly in her research sample. So queer is a word that's a little amorphous and also just indicates I'm not any particular thing, but I'm also not this thing. Right, so I'm not heterosexual, and so I might use queer. Whereas lesbian is more like I'm a woman who's attracted to women, who has sex with women, identifies as such.
Go ahead. Okay, are we at pronouns now?
Yeah,
you pronouns.
If you want to ask the.
All right, I got a few thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so you say, okay, we need diversity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you take a state. All right, or just take any geographic grouping.
Yep.
You say we need diversity. We need white, black, red, yellow,
Yep.
green, right? So what happens if you mix all the colors together? Like if you just take all the colors of paint and throw it together and you mix it, right? You're going to get one color. I think it turns out generally a blackish type thing. So if you have and you say we need diversity,
Yep.
right? And this state is going to be every color, and this state's going to be every color, and this state's going to be every color. Well, now the country's no longer diverse because everything, right? Whereas if you have this state is red and this state is yellow and this state is every color of the rainbow and now your country's diverse. Do you see what I'm saying? And then there's going to be a lot to unpack here, but also if you say, and when I say you, I mean one, if one says, you need to respect my culture and, and anything goes, or a sexually liberating culture, and you need to accept my culture, and you need to accept that my pronouns, or, my right to have a surgery and change my right. And you say, okay, you need to respect that, right? Mm-hmm. And then in Afghanistan, where it's probably the most sexually repulsive culture in the world, right?
Yep.
But that's their culture. So do we need to respect that culture? It gets a little.
Yeah, it gets muddy.
It
right?
gets
and this
very
is the
muddy
question,
and.
So this is the question. I love that you asked this question. And two, this is the reason that I ended up choosing the dissertation topic that I did.
Because there's a point where DEI and fostering my culture on you, and my culture is the right one because it's diverse, where that itself can become repressive.
Well, and I think that there's sometimes what can happen is that we assume that one particular group is also monolithic, right? So, and I think that that's actually a more dangerous trap.
So
thinking that all, let's use the example of all lesbians, right? That all lesbians want this same thing.
Yeah.
Well, no, like lesbians are also super diverse, right?
Yeah.
Because they have there's a variety of experiences and backgrounds. So one, I think that, dismantling the notion that any particular group, there's going to be diversity, even if they're using the same words or have the same identities, because I'm a blonde white woman. Not all blonde white women think the same way. So I think that there's that. And then, the question that always fascinates and captivates me is this notion of agency, right? And so, like, what decisions that we make how can we know if they're ever ours?
Like, why does DEI have to be mandated? So in the workplace, you have to have a sexual harassment policy, and there has to be training and stuff. I get it. That's kind of a good thing, right? But why does there have to be DEI training out there exactly?
I think
and what is DEI training?
That's,
Sherry, pause. So your dissertation you were starting to talk about. I'm taking notes for you to make sure we hit your stuff.
Make sure we hit this stuff.
So my dissertation, it's gonna sound like fluff, but I chose it kind of for that reason because it was topical at the time. I did a dissertation that did a textual analysis. It was a humanities dissertation on 50 Shades of Grey, which was like wildly popular. But I used it to explore the notion and concept of agency, in particular women's sexual and erotic agency. So it was grounded in...
What is agency, though?
Yeah, so agency is just basically our free will.
Okay.
Right? So how do we decide? Like, are we doing this because we really want to do it? Or are we doing it because the Overton window is really small, so we don't know what else we can do? And so, I always think about this line from Gayatri Spivak, who is a scholar still at Columbia. I think she's still there. And she was an Indian woman who wrote an essay called Can the Subaltern Speak? And a subaltern is just someone that is ultimately voiceless in a society that has no voice. So she was really curious to try to give voice, right, or amplify the voice of someone who is subaltern. And so she, as an Indian woman, she has a line that says, what she witnessed in India during, British colonization was white men, so the British, telling brown women, sorry, let me think of the quote. Something like she witnessed white men telling brown women how to feel about brown men. And so, and these women were practicing sati, or the act of self-immolation, which is when you light yourself on fire and sacrifice,
that's terrible.
right? So,
Jeez.
So we're going to take our opinions of what we think
why were
of
they
sati.
doing that?
So again, that woman that would practice sati, essentially she was a subaltern. So Spivak witnessed white men saving brown women from brown men. So in that particular culture, a woman had two choices. Either don't self-immolate, but risk honor to your family, and so this way making it more difficult for your children, for the next generation, or self-immolate, but to restore honor to your family, and so therefore to ensure the survival and thriving of your children.
Dishonoring the family by what? Sleeping with
A variety
the white
of,
men?
I mean,
got it.
just, but yeah, whatever she was accused of in terms of honor, dishonor.
That's like Harry Carey in the samurai culture.
So, and so Spivak wanted to, again, we can put our feelings about self-immolation aside, but the question is, in that,
I don't respect that culture. Just
so
like that's
in
that's
that
nuts.
though, the question that I was fascinated by, or subalternity generally, is that right in that space, ultimately, like her voice is lost because you've got the British telling her what she should do, which is not self-immolate, and you've got the Indian men in her community telling her what she should do, which is to self-immolate, right? So in that frame of agency, right, also considering like the future of her children, like, you can't divorce the decisions we make from the environments, the culture, the social norms and expectations that we live in.
Yeah.
And so, this question about like self-determination, DEI, like, I think speaks to like our own agency, right? And the culture or environment that's created that either enables or constrains our ability to, one, recognize all the choices that we have, and then two, to actually be able to take advantage of those choices without threat of retaliation or judgment or rejection or unfair criticism at least. And so I think that I think DEI is misunderstood in some ways in the same way that sex education is misunderstood. But I think that at its heart, in its best shape and form,
Right, in its best version.
in its best version of itself, it really is just trying to open the Overton window on the possibilities for as many people as possible.
Right.
And here's like a funny example that I learned a long time ago when one of my exes was working for a big firm and was working in labor and employment. And there had just been, I think, a huge study by maybe the ABA, and it looked at the gender wage gap, right? And it was looking at law firms as a place that you can clearly see this. So, the amount of money that men earn versus women. And what they found was that, by and large, women were doing like the same amount of work, not surprising. But when they would go in for their annual reviews, men would be like, "I'm awesome. I did a ton of awesome work, and you should promote me." And we're like good at self-promotion, whereas women would go in and say like, "Oh yeah, like I did a good job," and we're less comfortable with self-promotion. And would also like share credit a little bit more. And so, just even that skill set, and then partnering that with like, what if you think about, and this is why I think that DEI, it's so complicated and it gets such a bad rap. It's just about relationships. And so, again, we're human, right? We're going to gravitate towards the people that are kind of like similar to us. Right? Because we feel understood. And so, if you like sports and I like sports, then maybe like I'm going to invite you to watch the game. Yeah. And so, like, are we organizing society intentionally so that like we've got the people that watch sports and don't watch sports? Of course not. But what ends up happening because we can gravitate to those who are similar to us, well, then suddenly we spend more time with them, we build more relationships, so suddenly they're getting more work or they're getting promoted or, or they're being offered the job. And so it's more like, I think that at its best, DEI should raise our awareness of, who we spend time with, how we spend time with them, and then the doors that are open or are closed, depending upon, like, how all of that comes together.
I once sat in a mandatory DEI seminar, and the instructor was essentially telling me I need to feel guilty that I'm a white male. And it was just like, and I just found it insulting. Like I had to sit in the seminar for about an hour and a half and be instructed how not to be a racist and how not to be a bigot. And I found it insulting. Like it was just like
anything else, I also think that there's DEI done well.
Yes.
And I think that there's DEI done less well.
Yeah.
And we know from research, if you soak someone in shame and guilt, one, it shuts down any openness and learning process.
Yeah.
And so again, DEI at its best creates space for everyone to evaluate and become more self-aware.
Yeah.
Truly of their like maybe unconscious biases or to evaluate their actual biases.
I would sit down on a DEI class taught by you for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's how we got exposed to you, by the way. That might not be the right term in this, but seriously.
Hilarious, but yeah.
Jerry and I both watched the same DE&I video, and I think you were in the last presenters, and we both were like, "Oh, did you see her? Like, Dr. J was awesome."
Well, I really appreciate that.
How did you find your way into that field? I mean, you have a profile on Trial Guides. You're presenting at NJAJ Boardwalk and things. Like, how do you end up in that field?
Yeah. So, and again, like I think that what you all do is like so exciting and fascinating. And I feel so like grateful that I get to be a part of this.
You mean by hosting podcasts?
I mean, the whole, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Oh, shoot, we do practice law.
But I fell into this by accident.
Yeah.
And so, it was really like I was dating someone at the time who happened to be a labor and employment attorney. And she was really great and wonderful. And I was already kind of fascinated by like law and policy. And then I was on the Philadelphia Leadership Council for Lambda Legal, which is the nation's oldest and largest LGBT legal advocacy nonprofit in the country and for those living with AIDS and HIV. And it was like, the really exciting years with Obergefell v. Hodges and marriage equality. And so she and I would kind of do like partnering on, she was compliance and I was culture for workplace stuff. And that's how I started to do kind of some of the DEI and HR trainings. But, my master's is in education. Like, I'm a teacher, like, at heart. And I don't see the utility of being in a classroom where you're going to shut people down before you even have the opportunity, right, to be curious about them.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I'm really grateful that Widener taught me, and a few other people along the way, and one of the reasons my courses is successful is that I'm pretty good at creating an environment where everyone feels like they are able to participate and to disagree.
Do you think some of the struggles that you went through as a child, being picked on, things like that, do you think that, like in hindsight, you might not change it because you went through those things that you now?
Absolutely.
I mean, because you're a very magnetic type person. You're so easy to talk to. You're easy to be around. And do you think maybe some of those struggles that you had as a child have made you who you are today?
So it's
So Jerry, sorry to cut.
Yeah.
Only because. So I always do a little bit of research and
Yeah.
things. I think Jerry watched something or read something I didn't. Is that part of your background, your story?
Yeah, so I would say that it's like kind of remarkable that I'm like even doing this and that you've just said that, because I was the shyest, most introverted. I was a bullied kid. I was cross-eyed until I was 17. So I've had 8 corrective eye surgeries.
Oh my gosh.
I was like super scraggly. I had braces. I had like a limp, like growing pains. Like not only was I like not the popular kid, but I was a kid who would like go to the nurse and like pretend to have a stomach ache because I just couldn't be in school anymore. I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, and like there was a handwritten letter put in like mailbox that said like, you're so ugly and no one will ever love you and you should just go like kill yourself.
That's terrible.
And so I was really, really, really picked on. And to my family's credit, I'm really fortunate that even though I'm an only child, I had a huge family and I was overwhelmingly loved and adored. And so that was my safe harbor. There was no Instagram, right? So
Thank God, yeah.
when I left school, I could
seriously.
like leave school.
Yeah.
But because of that, I have a deep appreciation. I know that for every single kid that bullied me, they also were bullied. And there was a part of themselves that they felt that made them feel powerless, insecure, unworthy, unlovable. And what they were just trying to do was feel like they had some sense of power in the world.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in the motto, hurt people, hurt people. And so a lot of my work, like, again, I'm not interested in like the sensational headlines. I'm not interested in the manufactured outrage. Like, I'm really interested like to deeply know, someone and their experiences. I'm overwhelmingly curious. I don't want to know, like, okay, if you tell me you think this way, that's great. And even if it's something I disagree with, but I really want to know, like, what is your background that's informed those ideas and those thoughts? Because I know that I have a whole rich background of what it's informed mine. So that's like a little bit of how I come to this. Like, I want to create space for the bullied and the bullies.
Yeah.
I want to like bridge those gaps to recognize that like it all comes like from the same core of fear and worry. I've said this a million times and it's kind of like my tagline now, but when I tell people what I do, usually the next thing that happens is they say like, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And no matter what they ask me, one, I know that question is about to be something incredibly vulnerable or intimate that they don't have anyone else to ask. But no matter what question they're asking, they're always asking, am I normal? Am I lovable? Am I worthy? Am I enough? And am I safe? And boy, oh boy, are there so many messages about our sexuality, about our bodies, about the way we interact in the world, about the way we parent, about the way we connect, that tell us that no, we are not worthy, we are not lovable, we are not enough, we are not safe. And so if you can start to really be deeply curious about those things, right? Like that shame or that fear or that worry, and talk to someone like at that level, it just tunes out all the other noise. Right. And that's why, like, when we think about like liberal versus conservative, like I can't, that language to me is so unnecessary.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I don't want to soak people in more shame. I want to like help take the shame off their shoulders. And then like, that's where you really get to foster like a sense of, of true, like real connection, whether that's like fleeting for an hour or whether that's like someone now that you're going to, build a whole life with. But like that's kind of the ethos of all of my work.
All right. So if I can, Mark.
No, please.
Mark's regulating me today. All right. So
It's good to have a moderator, right?
No, it's great. Okay. So with what you just said there and all those things, how do you relate that to the cell phones, the social media, the pressures, the TikTok, the Instagram, like, and now people's pictures are AI pictures. And am I even talking to a real person, or is this just I press the AI canned response, and how is that accentuating all those pressures? Like you described the pressures you went through, but how is that different today? And what can be done to manage it? Like, I think it's sad. Like sometimes I'll bike home from work and maybe it's about 2 miles or so. And back in the day, in the summertime at the Jersey Shore and stuff, there would be kids on every street corner. I mean, I don't know the last time I saw kids play stickball. You know, like stickball was the thing. And where are they? They're all on their phones. And then you go into a waiting room somewhere and then they escape to the phone. And I know you talked about this at the seminar at the NJAJ Boardwalk a bit. It came up. But can you give us some pointers on that?
Yeah.
Give me some optimism on that? Or are the kids all just going to become droids or
No,
what?
I do feel optimistic.
Yeah.
In a few ways. One, like, I have noticed, even in my short time at Temple, right, like a little over 10 years is not like that long, but it's enough to have seen a dramatic change in my classrooms, which was just magnified and amplified post-COVID, right? So I used to see students who, in 2015 would come to class and you could see like the little burgeoning romances and who was waiting for who and who was chatting and, who clearly was going through a breakup and like all of these very kind of organic social interactions. That was already starting to dissipate like as we approached COVID, and then COVID just really sucked the wind out of it all.
Yeah.
And so now it's not uncommon at the beginning of the semester for students to like be in their phones, or the classroom not to be like full of chatty, conversation, or those little burgeoning romances, or even friendships. But I will say, because of the nature of my courses, by the end of the semester, all that's happening. So if you create an environment and you just give folks an opportunity and give them a few extra tools in their toolkit, like it's what they're like, yes, yes. I mean, I ask my students, what is your absolute favorite thing about being the generation that you are, and what's your absolute thing that you hate the most? And ultimately, the answer is always the same: technology. So they think it's the greatest part of their lives, and it's absolutely like the thing that is the most like brain rotting and awful thing. I think one of the things that we don't take seriously enough, that I'm only just starting to take seriously, really is the notion of like overwhelming surveillance.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
God. Yeah.
If
If you think about why young people are taking less risks, well, wouldn't you, if you know that like at any moment in time, anything that you're doing, whether you're riding your bike or, I ask my students at the end of the semester, like, how many of you, when you go out, like, and like, your jam comes on, you start busting moves? And I'm like, my whole family, like, and myself are big dancers and big singers and karaoke. And, I would say that like, they're in their, these are college kids. And a lot of them were like, no way. Because of the fear that I'm at the club and like everyone's got their phones out. I don't want to end up on someone's Instagram, like looking like a dork, And so I think that like, and surveillance to them feels like breathing air, right? They don't know, like, and what's shown up in my classroom this last semester is this deep longing and craving for the 90s. It's in not like the same way that any like younger generation like has a throwback, but what was it like, Dr. J? Tell us, master, what was it like before, the internet? And I say this as like that micro generation that grew up in AOL chat rooms, having like weird cyber sex with like total random.
Yeah.
That's even like a meme right now. It's like, what were you like back in the 90s?
Yeah.
It's such a like nostalgic thing.
Yeah. So that there is the nostalgia in my classrooms that I haven't experienced before in quite this way. But what I'm optimistic about is, right, in terms of, again, the pendulum swinging and the boomerang coming back around, we already are seeing, like, which is kind of ironic, a lot of the backlash to the commencement speeches where AI was being, touted by the commencement speaker, and then students being like, boo! I'm like, yeah, but y'all used AI to write your paper. So, But I do think that there will be a backlash to advancing technology and AI. And I think that the thing that feels particularly exciting for me right now is like, and I will say this, I basically am like a technologic dinosaur. I treat me as I'm 200 years old. I don't know anything. I'm horrible with technology. I don't like it. I've had to fight really hard to get to this place of what I'm talking about now. That is not my natural position. But what does excite me is that I think that AI is now forcing us to have deeper, more meaningful conversations about what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that like we are conducting the wildest human social experiment that maybe humanity has ever seen.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we don't have any answers, but I honestly think I believe that humans are resilient and brilliant and generous and innovative. I think that we will struggle in this mess, but that ultimately it will force us to really reflect on and then
Yeah.
prioritize like what being a human means. And I see that from my students already. Again, if you give them an opportunity to talk about it,
Yeah.
if you give them like a little bit of a roadmap,
Yeah.
right? Like, of course, they like want to like find partners, they want to fall in love, they want best friends, they want to feel fulfilled by
Yeah.
their, by their passions and their career, their future careers. They're just like, someone like give me a way to do it. And that like they have a different relationship with social media and technology, like love and hate, but they're also able to like navigate, and they're much more critical media consumers in a lot of ways than
Yeah.
older generations.
I read an article. It was entitled "AI is not only coming for your job; it's coming for your mind."
Yeah.
And sometimes I get upset and I get mad. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah.
Because at what point do we stop living? At what point do we stop being humans if, I'm going to press a button and the food's going to get here, and AI is going to suggest the letter I write to you, or AI is going to put up the thing. And then when do I it's like, you ever see the movie The Matrix?
Yeah.
It's that is becoming like a prophetic movie.
Yeah.
Like because at some point AI is just going to run everything and we're just going to be batteries in a pod and we're going to live in this virtual world. That's why when I saw like Facebook's the metaverse.
The metaverse, yeah.
Where I'm just going to sit on my couch and I'm going to go into someone's virtual store and I'm going to go to a concert in Japan sitting on my couch. I was just like, to me, that was just scary evil, like Matrix type, it's nuts.
Yeah, so, and we do this with like every iteration of new technology.
Agreed.
But this is
writing, industrial revolution.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I think one of the things
That's what the article said. It said that AI is changing the structure of the brain. Similar, and the last time this happened is when literacy happened.
Right, we went from oral history to the written
reading
word.
and writing.
Yeah, and again, this is where like I just believe in the incredible adaptability and resilience of humans.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's going to be messy, right, until we get to the other side. But something to think about, because everything that's the Earth is round, right? So if you think about there's a social theorist, philosopher, Herbert Marcuse, who wrote a book called The One-Dimensional Man in 1964. It was incredibly prescient. And there's a chapter in that book called Repressive Desublimation. And basically what Marcuse talked about was looking at the Industrial Revolution, right? And like the goal, the dream was that we could mechanize all these things so that it created more time for humans to do stuff in their lives that really mattered. Right? And so you could buy bread in a bag now. Going to buy Wonder Bread, so you didn't have to spend time baking the bread anymore. But like now that we didn't have to spend time baking the bread, what were we doing? And he was like, basically, people are sitting in front of their televisions eating their Wonder Bread out of their plastic bags.
Yeah.
And the extension of that is, well, what does it mean then, right? We no longer have to like grow the wheat, separate the wheat from the shaft. So you're connected to the land and the earth, and then you have to actually like knead the dough and then wait for it to rise. So you have patience, and then you bake it and you smell it and then you look at it and then you share it with your community.
Yeah.
Right. So like a disembodied dismantling of our sensory experiences. And so I think that that's what you're speaking to, right? Like, what is the role of embodiment or our body in all of this?
That's
and
like,
what is lost? No, we don't. I don't want to get up at 4 a.m. and bake my bread either.
Yeah.
But like, what's the middle ground so that we don't just become like mindless, like automatons?
This is why the humanities are so important in a liberal arts education, because this is the intersection of philosophy, human sexuality, and theology.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that, one of the things that, of course, breaks my heart as someone who did a humanities dissertation in a social science program who teaches in the College of Liberal Arts is that, you can create anything you want, but if you haven't thought deeply about all of these intersections, then whatever product you're going to put out into the world is going to have, like AI is going to have, consequences.
Yeah.
Or you're just going to have blind spots. And no, we can't like solve for X for everything. But I think that if you take away, the classics majors, the philosophy majors, the English literature majors, those things also, I think the thing that worries me the most is failure of imagination.
Yeah.
And what the humanities and liberal arts does is it trains our brains to fantasize and imagine the world that we want to live in. And so outside of that, like, where does that leave us? You know, how, if that muscle atrophies, and I don't think that it will. I think that, again, we are adaptive and resilient, and we will figure out another way to do it.
Yeah.
And I also think that the pendulum will swing back and the humanities and liberal arts will become more popular than ever. I hope that that happens soon because my job, you know, could feel a little bit more secure.
Part of the reason, you know, I do the podcast at least is because like these conversations that we're having, you know, I've never like before 2000, before cell phones, I didn't have I used to have conversations like this all the time. But once cell phones, it's no more. So part of the idea of the podcast is to have that same human interconnection. I think there's a big difference between an in-person podcast like this and sitting on the computer, you know, one-to-one. But what I have found is that like if you want something from someone, if you need something, if you go see the person, knock on their door, do an and it's so valuable now, like because you know, I really value that human connection.
And I think that that's what I mean, I think that that's what AI is already teaching us.
Like if I want to talk to my professor about the grade I got, I should go see
them in the
my
office.
professor, not send an email.
It definitely, you know, that is a pro tip. That is an absolute pro tip, right? Like I am way more willing to be accommodative of students I know because they're actually coming, you know, to my office versus like an anonymous, like random email. And again, I think there's a both and, right? So it's like technology, like porn, not all good and all bad, technology, not all good or all bad, but we are trying to figure out how to navigate this in, you know, within the structures that are taking us away in terms of time, energy, you know, algorithms, you know, where our like human brains are prioritizing things in a way. It's like, well, wait a minute, we've never prioritized this in the way that we're prioritizing it now. Why am I going to scroll on Instagram for like 2 hours versus, you know, go actually like pick up a phone or go hang out with someone. And I think there's like a time and place for all that stuff. But what I have found is that opening up conversations, again, I'm using sexuality as like my entrance point and my starting point, but that's like the tip of the iceberg. You know, really like all of my work is in service of helping people find connection, community, and a sense of belonging.
How do you reconcile, I think you had said at one point, maybe not today, but that you have a Catholic upbringing or whatever. How do you reconcile all this stuff with that? If you don't mind talking about that, it might be a bit personal.
You know, I have had a complicated relationship with my Catholicism. And I would say that, you know, I think it's really common for people to have complicated relationships with their religious upbringing, whether they like still are, you know, faithful and still involved and a member of the community, or they've left it behind.
Do some of the people that come and talk to you, you know, obviously you're not going to but do they talk about, hey, can I ask you, and does it often involve religion?
So
or their
I mean,
culture?
most people on the first day of class, I'll say like, you know, introductions, like tell me why you're taking the class. Oh, I'm taking because I was raised Catholic, I was raised Mormon, I was raised Jewish, I was raised in Islam. Like, I mean, really, you can't talk about sexuality without talking about religion. So, you know, growing up, I was raised in the Catholic Church. My mom's side is Catholic, my dad's side is Lutheran. And my mother's parents, my maternal grandparents, you know, especially my grandmother, she's my favorite person. She was my favorite person on earth. And so anything Oma did, you know, I was going to do too. So I really loved my Catholic upbringing until Opa, my grandfather, was diagnosed with cancer. And then I was really good and I prayed like a ton. And I was like, if you just pray, right, then like the good things will happen. And I prayed a ton and the good things didn't happen. He ended up passing away, right? And so when you're 12 years old, like the abstract thinking isn't there. So I was like mad at God. And, you know, then I was a teen and I was like, you know, rebellious. I was not the most rebellious teenager. But needless to say, I started questioning my faith. And I'd also had some negative interactions in the church. Like, you know, I had a priest tell me, you know, without even ever, it was a new priest, like, didn't introduce himself, didn't ask me my name, but I was probably like 14 or 15 at the time. And he just said, you know, make sure you keep your legs closed.
Oh, God.
And that, like, oh my gosh. And then as, you know, someone who's identified in a bunch of different ways as queer, as bisexual, as a lesbian, depending upon, you know, where I was in life, you know, the messages coming out of the Catholic Church were not supportive. And I think that the Catholic Church is doing better at that now, especially very recently, taking testimonies of LGBT peoples. And then, of course, like all of the sex abuse scandals, right? Like not even scandals, just like heartbreaking stories. And so, I was very black and white thinking about my Catholic upbringing. And now, as I've gotten a bit older, I'm able to apply the same, it's not all good and it's all bad. And so
Right.
the things that I love, the things that I've taken from my Catholic upbringing that I do in my classes, which might sound like a strange thing, the rituals and traditions are really important to me. They're important to mark time. They're important for the predictability that calms our nervous systems.
Yeah.
And so, if I'm in New York and I'm like passing the cathedral, I go and light a candle, right? I will. I don't attend church. I'm not like connected to my Catholicism in that way anymore. But I have deep respect for the awe and wonder that religion can bring to our lives.
They're saying there's a big resurgence of Gen Z.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Going back to church in New York
particular,
City.
Gen Z men. Women are are going back less, especially because of still kind of the patriarchal structures that assumes women should be submissive, and but men and women are flocking back to church because what are ultimately humans' goals, right? We want to find our person, or we want to find out where we fit and belong, and it's a place to meet people
and our purpose.
Yeah,
in
how
the
many?
world.
For older generations, where'd you meet your spouse? You probably met,
Sure.
At synagogue or at church or at temple, wherever. And so it's also an opportunity to say maybe we have
I met
shared
my
values.
wife. I used to empty her garbage cans at her beach club. That's where I met her. But anyway,
a whole different kind of
she
church.
was a member, and I emptied the garbage cans.
There you go. I love that. And all these years later, you're able to talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah, we were like 16, I think, or
Oh my
14.
gosh.
Crazy. Long time
So
ago.
I think that there's, Brene Brown, who's a researcher scholar that does a lot of work on shame and vulnerability, in her TED Talk from 1,000,000 years ago, she said, religion used to be a space for awe and wonder and curiosity and mystery. And now it's you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, and it's about certainty. Yeah. And so I've come to appreciate kind of the awe and the wonder and the mystery and the uncertainty that I can now look back and realize, my Catholicism, there was space for that. But a lot of my Catholic upbringing, it was this is the right way, this is the wrong way, follow these rules. And I'm but these rules don't make sense for me. Yeah. And they're making me feel bad and ashamed. And so, now I've been really curious, though not Catholic. I don't know if you're familiar with Father James Martin.
Yes, I think he shows up in my Facebook feed.
I love his podcast. Yeah. I love all the conversations. He is a person that is starting what I think are some really important and human conversations. So I would say, and I'm very careful because it's not uncommon in my classrooms for people to say I'm here because I was raised Catholic and I hate this. And, I also have people that are I'm here because I'm deeply religious.
Yeah.
And so there is no shaming, blaming, bashing of anyone's background in my classrooms. And at the beginning of the semester, we set we co-create very intentional community guidelines so that we know how we're going to interact and behave so that everyone can have as much of a voice as possible. So I would say my relationship to Catholicism has softened now. Yeah. But I won't diminish that, a lot of the messages about what it meant to be a woman, what my place in society was, what it meant to be a woman who wasn't straight. Really complicated. As also a person who ended up having an interfaith ceremony and marrying outside of my faith, interviewing a bunch of Catholic priests for this role. I ended up going with a Lutheran. So it's been an interesting road. But I have a new appreciation, at least, for the benevolence and goodness that religion can also create. And again, not thinking that anything is all good or all bad, especially kind of the organizing principles, right? So one of the things when we're talking about third space or community building, I might not have loved going to church all the time, but it was a place where I went every Sunday and you saw the same people, and whether you liked them or not, that person could fix your car and this person's going to watch, the kids. And so, you built those relationships that are really sustaining, even if you're not in love with the person or they're your best friend. And so just thinking about what are the places that obligate us to be in the same place at the same time over and over again so that we're seeing the same people and familiarizing ourselves so that our faces aren't buried in our phones.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, I'll often get a question at the end of the semester. I do anonymous questions, and the question will be like, hey, Dr. J, I'm really lonely. How do I make friends? And I'll say, just show up at the same place at the same time, like for an hour a week, and just pay attention to who's there, you know? And whether it's the person you get your coffee from, or it's, you know, the clerk in whatever shop you're in, or the person that goes to the park and walks their dog at the same time.
Yeah.
Like those incidental connections are what lead to the bigger connections. And so I think that, you know, for me, a curious question is like, how are we organizing ourselves so that we have more opportunities to feel obligated to each other in a good way, to show up at the same time, at the same place, right? And like build all of that. And what happens when, like, you know, majority of the time we're showing up online instead, or it's not translating into, you know, the real world.
Yeah. Cool.
You want to take a couple minute break? You want to keep?
Yeah, let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so that was a good break. So we took a quick break, and we were like, should we end now? And Mark's got something he wants to ask, and I'm like, should I ask you about the alien stuff or not? And we're like, I was like thinking to myself, well, let's not go down totally off the rails in a rabbit hole, but I just sort of can't help myself. So I just want to ask you real quick. Do you think like when you talk about sexuality, reproduction, human evolution, that the need for sexuality and gender will eventually become outmoded or unnecessary in some way? And when I look at that, when we look at technology, how dramatically it's changed in the last 5 years and 10 years, and then you hear all this stuff about AI, and they say AI is going to be this and it's going to be that. AI is going to be completely different in 6 months.
Yeah.
And how it's ramping up. And so if you look at the technology just in the last 10 years, fast forward 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, taking into consideration that the Congress is having hearings and they're releasing stuff about, you know, unidentified flying objects, aerial phenomenon, and then people talking about these aliens that they're human-like, but their heads are real big, the eyes are big, and their thing, and then they seem to be kind of androgynous. Let's go off the rails. Why not? And do it. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like if sexuality and gender is going to become outmoded or unnecessary 1,000 years from now or anything like that?
So, like, this is a hilarious and awesome question.
And for the record, I didn't do acid or smoke weed before this, but anyway, go.
So one, I definitely believe that we are not the only game in the entire universe. So, like, do I believe in aliens?
Here,
I don't.
pull the mic a little closer. No,
Sorry.
just you can pull.
Better.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Just it's closer to you.
So I don't necessarily like have an opinion either way about like aliens specifically, but do I believe that there's probably like other life that we don't know exists? I don't know, maybe. Again, the awe, the wonder, the mystery, the curiosity. Do I think that like gender and sexuality will just become flattened?
Yeah, that's what.
You know, this is a place where I may be biased, but I don't think that that's ever going to be true. For one, like in my heart of heart, I just think that that's what makes life worth living, right? Falling in love, getting your heart broken, grief and loss, joy and sorrow.
Yeah.
I think that is so deeply human, our craving for connection, you know, for like that drive and motivation.
Yeah.
But I think also, you know, less pie in the sky. I think that the notion, again, of transgression, right? So that pendulum swinging back. So I think that like if sexuality and gender become flattened, right, what will follow exactly after will be completely and totally, you know, built again in a different way.
Yeah.
Because I think that one thing that is constant about human evolution is our desire and need for adaptation and change. Yeah. So we don't just stay in one place. You know, we are constantly like rethinking, fiddling with things. And no, I am not worried that gender and sexuality become this flat, monolithic, dead-end, kind of unnecessary, superficial thing.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that that's how we weirdly treat it in society now. Like, oh yeah, what you got to focus on is like your job and, you know, making sure that you've got like a house and raising your kids and all this stuff, right? Like that's the important stuff.
Yeah.
This less important stuff is all this sexuality fluff, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Whereas like all of that stuff is predicated on the relationship that you have to sexuality, which is really just an umbrella for like intimacy, connection, belonging, desire, like health, wellness, mental health, power.
Yeah.
Right. So no, I think that the future aliens of the world will have a rich and diverse sexual life.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. I don't know how I follow aliens, but I got a couple follow-ups.
Sure.
You said something at the very beginning. I do take notes. I
Yeah.
didn't quite take it down. But it was along the same lines of what you just brought up again, how sexuality and, that touches on all aspects of your life.
Yeah.
Be it from, work, friendship, different. Can you explain that a little bit more, like what you mean by that?
Yeah, and I recognize that the longer I do this, the worse I get at explaining it because it ends up feeling just like breathing air to me. So, the easiest way to explain this is like, why the hell on earth would a sex educator want to teach at a law school? Like, how did those two things go together? The way that I look at the law, which is the way that I look at so many things, is that the decisions that we make, whether we are aware or not, we are deciding them based on all of the messages that we received about what it means to be a man or a woman or how to find, relationships, connection, intimacy, vulnerability, power, dominance, submission, etc., shame, guilt, fear, worry, insecurity, confidence. And so, I'm just really curious what the law or really any field, industry, or discipline will produce if more of these conversations are able to happen so that whatever people are producing or putting out into the world, it's coming from a place that is less ashamed, less fearful, less worried, more self-aware, and more embodied. So like the decisions that we're making about whether it's sex work or bodily autonomy or labor practices or education, et cetera, right? A lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about how we should run things. And a lot of those strong feelings like come from a place that all of my work is based in, right? It comes from that place of like, well, what is your humanity? What are the messages that you received? Like, how do you behave and move in the world? Like one of the clearest examples, I might have done this at NJAJ, but I'll ask like an audience, whether it's like college students or not. I want everyone to turn their brains off, and I want you to picture you're at a restaurant and there's a heterosexual couple on a first date. They go to order. Let's assume everyone's above 21. They're ordering a drink. What's she ordering? Right? And they'll say, oh, like a Cosmo or something fruity. Yeah. What's he ordering? Beer or whiskey? All right, now they're going to order dinner. What's she ordering? A salad. What's he ordering? Steak. Yeah. Right? All right, now they're going to the parking lot. What's she driving? I don't know, like something cute. What's he driving? A truck. Yeah. Right? Now they're going home. Like, where is she living? Well, definitely not a garden apartment, right? If she can afford to live like on a higher floor for safety. Where is he living? I don't know, mostly anywhere he wants. All right, now they're like going to college. They're going to major in something. What's she majoring in? Marketing, psychology. What's he majoring in? Finance, engineering. Yeah. So like those decisions are not made in a vacuum, right? Those decisions are made based on what we have been taught about who we can be, related to our gender, our race, our class, our ability, our sexuality, our desires. And so my job is to like help like articulate what those scripts are and then to expand them and be curious about them so that like we're not just making decisions like kind of mindlessly on a relationship escalator or on a career escalator, right? That we're being more intentional so that when we're choosing the salad or the whiskey, we can feel confident in knowing that that is a choice we actively made because it makes us feel really good. We're not choosing that thing because of the social reward we get, right? Doing like the shot of whiskey, but it's like, oh. Yeah. Or like you're eating a salad and you're like, what I really want right now is like a giant juicy steak, right? But that's not the thing I'm supposed to do. So that's the reason that I do a lot of what I do. And whether that shows up in, like, again, the laws and policies that we create or the curriculums that we build or the way that we run industry, like, I want people to be more self-aware and secure in their ability to feel lovable enough, worthy to navigate their relationship with shame and really help figure out, like, is this something I need to be ashamed about or not? So that, like, the way they show up in the world is more whole.
And that goes back to your concept of agency, kind of, it sounds like, too. Like, are you getting the steak because you want the steak? Or are you getting the steak because society tells you need to be getting the steak and all that stuff?
And then, if you keep ordering the steak but you don't really want it, probably you're going to build up a lot of resentment, maybe some contempt, right?
Give us, just some parting things, I'll give you one more. Just basically everything that you're talking about, what you teach, how can that translate into? How can that help the legal community?
Yeah.
What can you kind of pass along to them?
So, one of my inspirations for this, or one of the things that came out of me teaching at the law school, is students often said, I am so excited. I love being a law student, or I hate being a law student, depending upon the day. But for me, this class helped me make sense of why. Again, reconnect me with the why of being a lawyer or being in law school, because it's reminded me that what I'm trying to do is create more spaces for human flourishing and thriving through putting policies and pieces of legislation through that aren't coming from this nervous, anxious, worried, fearful place, right? But are actually coming from this place, even if they end up being the wrong policies, even if, it ends up backfiring and not working. But what happens when we create things, when we create a piece of legislation that is not driven by fear and shame? What happens when we confront the things that make us feel the most vulnerable? What could we build? What could we imagine if we do that? What happens when we flex that muscle? And then what happens if we don't have that opportunity, right? We create more us and them. We create more othering. We cut off conversations. We censor people. We don't respect people. We don't feel like we have a voice in the game. We take up too much space. We don't take up enough space. And so, in teaching at the law school, I'm hoping to create more space so that we can come up with more dynamic solutions to solve really intense problems, right? And I recognize the law is not the number one tool to solve everything, but oftentimes it is one of the main tools. And so if you have a judge or an attorney or a senator, right, making decisions because they haven't unpacked all their own shame and guilt and their messaging about what it means to show up in the world with their beliefs, desires, values, et cetera, I just think that we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Awesome. So, Dr. J, Jen, where can people find out more about you, follow your work, and then any comments you have at the end? I think you got a family birthday coming up.
So I'm a Luddite. I'm not on any social media. I like to live my life in the real world, but I really appreciate that all of you put this digital content out there so that I have space to do that. So if you want to follow me, I would say, you can always
call
me.
Exactly. Knock on my door.
You can always find my email address, Jennifer.Pollitt, Pollitt @temple.edu. I actually love hearing from folks. Never has anyone ever emailed me or knocked on my office door, and I didn't want to have a conversation. So there's that. And then last but not least, I could not have made any of this work possible without the incredible support of both of my parents, who I love dearly. And my mom just turned 70 on April 11th, and my father is turning 70 on June 17th. So, Dad, happy birthday.
What are your parents' names?
My dad's name is Scott, and my mom's name is Diane.
Diane. Happy birthday, Diane.
Big time. Happy birthday. You
Thanks
guys
so
raised
much.
an awesome
Thank you guys
daughter.
so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.